Hey guys, tonight we're stepping softly through petals that once whispered to the gods. The sky above you is a hot sheet of gold, cracked slightly at the edges like old paint. Around you, the air smells not just of flowers, but of time, incense, and distant chanting. You're walking barefoot on warm, dusty stones toward a garden that isn't really a garden. This place, it blooms with meaning, with purpose. And yeah, maybe just a little blood. You're here in the beating heart of the Aztec Empire, Tenochtitlan, though no one around you calls it ancient yet. The city's alive, shimmering with energy, built across a web of canals and causeways that cut through Lake Texcoco like veins. Floating gardens drift nearby, each one packed with so many marigolds and cacao trees. It looks like nature decided to throw a parade. But you're not here for a stroll. Nope. You're here for the Zakia Yodel, the flower wars, and more intimately, the rituals that follow. See, the Aztecs didn't just love flowers. They feared them, respected them, gave them as literal fuel to the god that made the sun rise. And you lucky dreamer, are about to witness what happens when a civilization believes the only way to keep the universe from collapsing is to offer it beauty on a sacrificial plate. Here's the twist, though. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I'm always curious who else is out there under the same sleepy stars. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin by trailing behind a line of young boys. Their dark hair braided with fresh white blossoms, their shoulders stiff with nerves. They carry offerings, delicate arrangements of petals and feathers, and their arms tremble just slightly under the weight. The flowers aren't heavy, but the meaning? That's another story. The high priest walks just ahead. His headdress is a tower of jade and gold, but your eyes drift to the crimson smudge behind his ear. Not blood, not yet. Just a natto dye pressed into the shape of the sun, barely visible under the glare. He stops before a strange wall, made entirely of skulls, and raises a single marigold that you'd think flowers and skulls wouldn't mix. But here, they're part of the same sentence. The ritual garden is behind the skull rack, nestled in a courtyard humming with bees and something that sounds like a distant flute. The garden isn't wild. It's obsessively curated. Orchid vines trained into perfect spirals, sacred dahlias blooming in tight, orderly clusters. Every flower has a role, every color a consequence. You notice how some plants are caged in gold filigree. Others are surrounded by ash, as if they're being punished. And a few, rare and luminous, are guarded by armed boys with obsidian blades. You blink. Did that sunflower just move? The air grows thicker the deeper you go. Flowers here aren't just plants. They're identities. Some are named after warriors, some after stars. One, you're told, only blooms after it hears human weeping. You're not sure if that's poetic or horrifying. Probably both. A temple looms behind the garden. Not the main pyramid. That's reserved for broader theatrics. This is smaller, round, and smells like old honey and warm stone. It's called the House of Fragrance. The locals say if you breathe too deeply in there, you might never leave. Entranced, drugged, or simply pulled into the spirit world by a particularly persuasive blossom. Inside, the walls are painted with murals of suns being fed by rivers of flower petals. One panel shows the sun frowning, literally frowning, while priests scramble to offer more marigolds and hibiscus. Another shows a skeleton bursting from a lily, grinning far too widely. But tonight, the ritual hasn't begun yet. You're early, which gives you a glimpse into the preparation point. Two girls sit cross-legged near a pool, their bodies painted in spirals of blue and gold. Their hair is dusted with pollen. Every time they exhale, it looks like spring sneezes into the air. A priest bends low and presses a flower to each of their foreheads. The girls don't flinch, but you do, because you're starting to realize what happens next. These aren't just offerings. They're participants. Sometimes, they are the ritual. A mainstream fact? Sure, the Aztecs believed that the sun god Huitzilopochtli required nourishment to journey across the sky each day. While blood sacrifice is well known, fewer remember that he also needed floral energy. Huitzilopochtli, the death of flowers. And here's your quirky fringe tidbit. Some Aztec texts claim certain flowers could speak. Not metaphorically, like full sentences, usually warnings. One allegedly told a priest, "This is not the day. The sun sleeps." That priest vanished shortly after, and the scholarly debates? Oh, they're spicy. Historians still argue whether these rituals were meant more for spiritual alignment or literal cosmological survival. Some suggest the flower sacrifices were largely symbolic. Others, they think the Aztecs genuinely believed the sun would die without the right floral choreography. The children file in again, this time holding hands. Their faces are calm. Too calm. Someone has sung them into a trance. The petals in their baskets begin to fall, one by one, as if the flowers themselves are nervous. The priest speaks. His words are rhythmic, repetitive, not quite a song, not quite a prayer, just instructions for the sun. You're not fluent in Nahuatl, but you catch a phrase, Tonatiuti, sun, we sing for you. And the sun answers. Sort of. A shaft of light slices through the temple roof, landing right on the altar where the petals are piling. Dust swirls in it like tiny dancers. One of the guards breathes a soft, like he's seen this 100 times and still doesn't get tired of it. Neither do you, because somehow, in this strange moment, surrounded by children dressed as flowers, skulls polished to a shine, and a sky that hasn't blinked yet, you feel it too. The sun is listening. You follow the priests as they step out into the wider plaza, the sun now fully awake and spilling across the flagstones like molten citrus. The air is dry, heavy with incense, but sharp beneath it all is the unmistakable scent of crushed marigolds. Earthy, bitter, with that almost peppery tang. A group of young apprentices sweeps ahead, clearing a path not with brooms, but with bundles of fragrant herbs tied together, basil, episode, and copal leaves. Releasing a cleansing trail behind them, they're preparing the ritual route, because timing, here, is everything. See, the Aztecs didn't just worship the sun. They tracked it like accountants with a cosmic obsession. You learn, quite quickly, that the ritual you're about to witness wasn't picked at random. No, it's been calculated, aligned, matched to the exact moment when Tonatiuh, the sun god, is believed to reach a vulnerable position in his daily sky journey. You step carefully behind the high priest, who mutters to himself as he walks, holding a circular obsidian disc that catches and bends the sunlight like a mirror from another dimension. It's not just for show. This disc is their solar calendar in miniature. With it, he's watching the angle of the shadows, noting where they fall across pre-marked stones embedded in the ground. Each stone tells a part of the sun's story. Today's shadow crosses one etched with a jaguar swallowing a hummingbird. You've learned enough by now to realize that's not great news. You feel the temperature rise. Back at the temple garden, flower sacrifices are laid in precise spirals. Yellow to the east, red to the west, blue to the south, white to the north. A central cluster, usually orange, is left for the gods to consume directly under the sun's zenith. The spiral isn't symbolic. It's literal cosmography. The flower pattern mimics the Aztec view of the universe, layered, color-coded, and in constant need of appeasement. A mainstream fact, Since you're keeping score, the Aztecs followed a complex solar calendar, the Tenochtitlan, which combined ritual and agricultural cycles into a dizzying but remarkably accurate system. They used it to plan everything from coronations to conquests, and of course, flower offerings. You shade your eyes and look skyward. It's almost midday. That's when things get noisy. A group of young warriors bursts into the plaza, dressed in elaborate hummingbird costumes. Feathers shimmer blue-green in the sun, and their faces are streaked with charcoal and vermilion. They chant, low and rhythmic, as they circle the spiraled flower arrangement like satellites. One of them carries a conch shell, which he blows with a long, sorrowful wheeze. It sounds like a whale lost in the mountains. Then, silence that you're pulled aside by an older man with a face like cracked leather. He's a keeper of celestial knowledge, you're told, a sun reader. He carries a woven pouch of flower seeds and shows you how each one is planted at the solstice, harvested during equinox, and offered only during sun week days, like today. You ask what happens if the ritual is missed. That he doesn't laugh. Instead, he says simply, "Then we go dark." Now, here's a curious, lesser-known tidbit. Some records suggest that if the sun rose too red, or if it was obscured during key rituals by clouds or birds, especially crows, it was interpreted as divine displeasure. There's even one story where a priest allegedly leapt into the lake just to distract a flock of black herons from flying overhead at the wrong moment. You glance up again. No herons today, but a few vultures circle in lazy loops. Historians still argue whether the entire solar ritual system was built for show, to unite a complex society under shared myth, or whether the Aztecs really believed that if they got the day's flower ritual wrong, the world would end. Some suggest the rituals evolved from seasonal planting ceremonies. Others claim they were always about blood and bloom from the start. Either way, you don't want to mess this up. You feel the crowd thickening around the plaza. Merchants lower their heads. Children go quiet. Even the dogs seem to sense something. A boy hands you a small blossom, white with a pink center. "For your thoughts," he says, before running off. The high priest raises his hands that he speaks not in booming declarations but in soft, repeated mantras. His voice rises and falls like waves. The chant is like a lullaby, except it's meant for the sun. You're not entirely sure if you're supposed to join in or just stand there awkwardly. So you hum quietly, hoping not to anger any gods. Suddenly, a line of flower bearers begins to move forward, each balancing a clay bowl on their heads filled with different blooms: calla lilies, wild orchids, and scarlet sage. One stumbles slightly, and there's a ripple of panic. The priest stares hard, but says nothing. The boy corrects himself. The bowl remains steady. Everyone exhales that you're handed a single red bloom. You don't know its name, but it smells like cinnamon and regret. A soft drumbeat begins. One beat every few seconds. It echoes off the stone and into your chest. You feel yourself matching it, sinking. It's not hypnotic. It's cellular, like your blood wants to follow it. Then, the sun hits its highest point. The priest holds out the mirror disc, catching the full blaze, and turns it slowly until the light focuses onto the orange cluster at the center of the flower spiral. The petals begin to smoke, not burn. Not really. They just shimmer, sizzle faintly, as if the sun is sipping them. You wonder if it's all symbolic. But then the conch shell blares again, and the air shifts. A breeze picks up. Every flower bearer drops to their knees. You follow suit. It seems appropriate. The moment stretches long, too long. The sun seems to hesitate. And then, warmth floods the plaza again, stronger than before, as if something has been accepted. The priest bows low. The crowd releases a quiet murmur, like bees settling back into their hive. People begin to stand. The spell breaks. It worked. For now. You stand slowly, your knees crackling like old reeds, but you're too entranced to care. The flower spiral is still intact, though the center now glows faintly from that eerie solar kiss. The petals glisten with dew, or is that sweat? You can't be sure. Around you, the gathered crowd begins to disperse, but not entirely. They're hovering, expectant. You hear murmurs, soft and rhythmic like insects buzzing in tall grass, that it isn't over. Not even close. The flower offerings were just the beginning. The appetizer. A polite knock on the god's golden door. Now comes the main event, feeding the sun, and no, it's not what you think. There are no bowls of fire, no golden goats being led to their doom. What you see instead is color, a moving tapestry of blooms, feathers, and dancing bodies. Dozens of priests and dancers re-enter the plaza, each draped head to toe in carefully chosen petals. Some wear tunics stitched entirely from woven flower stems. Others hold garlands that trail behind them like wedding veils. A few even have full masks made of pressed hibiscus, obscuring their faces entirely. They glide, not march. You can't hear their footsteps, just the faint rustle of leaves and the jingling of ankle shells. You realize quickly that this isn't just performance. It's nutrition. The sun, according to Aztec belief, needs beauty to survive, not just admiration. Sustenance. Flowers are more than symbols. They're food for gods. The act of offering them in motion, scent, and ceremony is thought to strengthen Tenochtitlan as he blazes across the sky that you're watching divine meal prep. In petal form, here's a mainstream fact. While most people associate Aztec worship with human sacrifice, and let's be honest, there was plenty of that, many rituals began with flower offerings. The Aztecs viewed flowers as hearts of the earth, pulsing with life energy. In fact, warriors returning from battle were often welcomed with garlands, not weapons. And here's your weird tidbit of the day. Some dancers wore special belts filled with crushed flower pulp mixed with cocoa butter. As they moved, the mixture would heat and melt, releasing a steady fragrance trail behind them like a floral exhaust pipe. Kind of like spiritual Febreze. You take a step closer to the nearest dancer just to catch the scent. It's overwhelming, a heady swirl of vanilla orchid, tuberose, and something metallic underneath. The kind of smell that feels like it's pressing on your temples and unzipping your spine. The lead priest claps twice. Suddenly, the dancers shift in formation. You blink, and they've arranged themselves into a giant, rotating flower, their bodies the petals, moving in counterclockwise sways. From above, it must look like a blooming dahlia. You're just grateful not to be in the middle of it. One misstep, and you'd probably get gently trampled by 10 men in sunflower pants that a few onlookers begin to hum again, the same low chant from earlier. You notice the rhythm mimics the priest's claps. 2 beats, then pause, 2 beats, then pause. The pattern mimics the heartbeat of the sun, or so the old temple stories say. But not everyone is watching the dance. You catch a glimpse of a young girl kneeling near the edge of the temple wall. Her hands are full of crushed petals. She sprinkles them over a small flame, whispering something to herself. No one else seems to notice her. Or maybe they're pretending not to. You move closer. She looks up suddenly, meeting your gaze. Her eyes are bright and unblinking. For warmth, she says simply, "So he doesn't get cold again." You nod, not sure what else to do. She returns to her work. Crushed petals, soft fire, whispered words. There's something deeply human about all this. You begin to feel that the Aztecs weren't just feeding a god. They were feeding a fear. The fear of silence, of shadow, of waking up one day and finding the sun had simply decided not to show up. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on flower rituals reflected a deeper agricultural anxiety or was simply layered theater, a way to control the masses through spectacle. Some say it's both. A cosmic insurance policy dressed in petunias. The dancing continues. Now the dancers are throwing petals into the air, creating a gentle rain of color that falls on the stone plaza. Children dart in to catch them midair, squealing softly before being ushered back to the edge. You feel one land on your shoulder. It's warm, oddly sticky, and smells like overripe mango. You resist the urge to taste it. Barely, another part of the ritual begins. Flower bundles are now being arranged into symbols, suns, serpents, hearts, and something that looks suspiciously like a canoe with wings. The symbols are then carefully lit on fire, allowed to smolder, not blaze. The goal is smoke, not flame. Fragrant smoke that rises slowly into the sky like a scented SOS. "Eat this, son," a boy near you whispers. You're not sure if he's praying or just stating the obvious. Another priest begins to drum. This time it's faster, more insistent. The dancers begin to stagger, not from exhaustion, on purpose. Their formation shifts again, now mimicking the arc of the sun's daily path across the sky, from east to west, rising to zenith, then bowing down again. One dancer collapses, purposefully, right at the sunset mark. You glance at the high priest, expecting alarm. But no, he's nodding slowly. This, apparently, is expected. Some rituals include the falling of the flower, a moment where the god is shown what happens if he does not receive his offering. A performance of failure to gently threaten the divine. You think back to the girl with the petals and the flamed he doesn't get cold again. You start to understand. The Aztecs didn't just worship the sun. They negotiated with it, bargained, teased, threatened, even. All in the name of survival. The final dancer lowers themselves to the ground. A sudden gust of wind lifts the remaining petals into a swirling spiral. The crowd gasps. It's beautiful, yes, but it also feels like a response. You don't know if it's from the sun, but it's from something. The high priest claps once. The ritual ends. The plaza goes still, save for the drifting petals and a soft chime of wind through obsidian chimes overhead. You exhale, realizing you've been holding your breath. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crows that it's midday, and the sun is still up. You're still standing in the sun-soaked plaza, but now the scent of charred petals mingles with something sweeter. Cacao, maybe? No, it's pulque. Fermented agave bubbling softly in nearby ceramic jugs. Priests and helpers pass them around, and you realize this part of the ritual is more intimate, more internal. A shift from ceremony to reflection, but you're not allowed to linger long. A quiet bell chimes 3 times, and suddenly, the mood turns. The crowd parts as a new procession begins to form. At its center, you spot a cluster of children, maybe 6 or 7 years old, walking in synchronized, deliberate steps. They're barefoot, too, and their feet are dyed purple, as though they've been walking through crushed berries. You want to think they're just more flower bearers, but you've been here long enough to know better. These are the Zacapilis chosen, the children raised in temple schools from infancy, selected not by wealth or lineage but by signs. Unusual birthmarks, dreams, and in at least one case, a flower blooming in a newborn's palm. Tonight, these children are part of the bloom. A mainstream historical fact. The Aztecs did indeed raise children in specialized schools tied to their roles in religious society. Some were trained to become warriors, others scribes, but a rare few were chosen for sacred rituals, particularly those linked to fertility, agriculture, and, yes, solar worship. These children were considered living gifts, Tlaquemetl, the human threads of divine fabric. You're brought to a quieter part of the complex, a shaded corridor lined with murals. They all depict the same thing, over and over, flowers growing from the mouths of children. At first, you think it's symbolic. Then you notice the expressions on the faces. Not ecstatic, not serene, just still. A priest speaks softly as he walks beside you. The flower is born in silence, he says, and so must the offering be. You're not sure what to say to that. The children are led into a small courtyard filled with floating petals. The ground is covered in soft moss, and a single beam of sunlight cuts through the open ceiling, illuminating a circle etched in obsidian tiles. The girls wear skirts of woven lilies. The boys wear belts strung with dried rosebuds and small bells. They look like little garden statues brought to life. Then they start to sing that it's not a song you understand, musically or emotionally. The melody is lilting, almost too high for comfort. The words seem to loop, repeating phrases about light, time, and the bloom of silence. You realize this is not meant for human ears. It's meant for the sun, and maybe for the flowers that you're handed a small scroll by a nearby temple scribe. It's made of bark paper, painted in tight pictographs. You see symbols for growth, light, tears, and, curiously, frogs. The priest notices your confusion and explains that frogs represent rain, transformation, and, sometimes, rebirth. Even flowers need rain, he says, and so do souls. Here's a quirky tidbit from the fringe. Some Aztec myths claim that certain flowers bloomed only when sung to by children. These song flowers were rare and, according to one priest's notes, could predict eclipses if plucked during their brief bloom. Naturally, nobody alive has ever seen one. The debate among historians? It's a thick one. Some scholars argue these children were purely symbolic, honored, revered, but never harmed. Others point to murals, fragments of oral history, and Spanish missionary records that suggest otherwise. Historians still argue whether the children were returned home or offered permanently to the gods. That phrase gets repeated a lot. Too much to ignore. The sun moves slightly in the sky, and the beam of light shifts. It now hits the obsidian circle directly. That's the cue. The children stop singing. One by one, they step into the beam. A priest anoints them with flower water, infused with jasmine, marigold, and ground morning glory seeds. It's said to purify the spirit, but also to dull the senses. The smell is intoxicating. You feel lightheaded just standing nearby. One boy hesitates. He looks up, not at the priest, not at the crowd, but at the sky. You follow his gaze, and for a moment, it feels like the sun flickers, just a blink. Then he steps forward. No coercion, no drama, just a soft jingle of rosebuds as he joins the circle. The ritual continues. You notice the way the priests handle the children. Gently, like glass. Some touch their foreheads with the petals of a cactus flower, believed to guard the heart from fear. Others whisper blessings that sound like lullabies. The children begin a slow, spiraling dance inside the circle. Their feet barely lift off the moss. Their arms move in mirrored patterns, echoing the motion of leaves and wind. It's beautiful and eerie, like a clockwork garden on the edge of dreaming. The high priest steps forward. He holds a garland woven from over 50 flower species. Each one represents a day in the sun's journey. He places it on the ground, creating a second spiral around the children. You realize they're now enclosed in symbols, petals for the soul, light for the spirit, silence for the gods. You're not sure if this is a blessing or a goodbye. The dance slows. The children kneel. The beam of sunlight begins to fade, and as it does, so does the movement. When the final sliver disappears, the children lie down, arms crossed, eyes closed, not asleep, not entirely awake. The hush falls over the courtyard. The priest raises his arms. They are the seeds, he says softly. Tomorrow, the sun will rise. Because of them. You want to ask, will they rise too? But no one answers, because the ritual isn't built for questions. It's built for continuity, for assurance, for feeding a sky that, on some days, feels dangerously close to forgetting you exist. The sun has dipped slightly now, just enough to cast elongated shadows over the plaza, turning dancers into towering silhouettes and flower bundles into dark mounds. You're ushered along a corridor lined with obsidian panels, each one polished to such a fine sheen that you can see your face reflected alongside that of the warriors passing by. Only these warriors aren't marching toward battle in the way you might expect. They're dressed in feathers and flowers. Their armor is soft, their weapons symbolic, and yet their faces are hard with purpose. This is the beginning of the Huitzilopochtli, the Flower War Parade. And you're about to witness something profoundly confusing, because what looks like a festival is, in truth, a declaration of ritual violence. But not for conquest, not for territory, not even for revenge. These wars exist purely for tribute, living tribute. Prisoners, yes, but in the Aztec world, prisoners weren't just captives. They were keys, ingredients, required participants in a cosmological recipe to keep the universe turning. And what better way to gather these sacred bodies than to dress the entire endeavor in marigolds and confetti? The parade opens with laughter. Women throw flower petals from high terraces. Drummers beat out intricate rhythms as children toss painted gourds like party favors. You spot men wearing jaguar pelts stitched with vines, and one particularly enthusiastic elder who's glued petals to his face like a flowering beard. You almost forget what's coming next, but then the laughter dulls slightly as a group of flower warriors enters the square. Now, here's a mainstream fact. The Huitzilopochtli, or Flower Wars, were ritualized battles fought not with the intent to destroy, but to capture. These were arranged conflicts between the Aztecs and neighboring city-states, especially Tlaxcala, where both sides understood the point wasn't to win, but to provide worthy captives for ritual purposes. Yes, both sides knew what they were doing. It was cosmic choreography. You begin to realize how deeply theatrical this all is. Each warrior in the parade wears a specific flower emblem. You see warriors of the Quetzalcoatl, bright red tropical blooms for those who've taken 3 prisoners in their lives. Others wear simpler Simpasicil, the classic marigold, for first-timers. And then there's the rare few in all white, those who've never captured, but who march anyway, hoping this will be their chance. They don't walk with swagger. They walk with urgency. A fringe tidbit now for your inner trivia vault. Some flower warriors allegedly used perfumes derived from crushed magnolia and smoked chili seeds to confuse the spirits of their enemies. Basically, they turned themselves into walking hallucinations. Imagine trying to duel someone while choking on fragrant spice fog. That's the vibe that you're herded gently toward a stone platform where the priest is giving the crowd a rousing speech. It sounds ceremonial, motivational, almost like a TED Talk, if TED were short for totally epic death. You don't catch every word, but a few phrases stand out. Those who bring flowers bring life. Let blood fall like pollen. And curiously, you are not killing. You are gardening. Yeah, gardening. Historians still argue whether the flower wars were practical military drills, political displays of dominance, or entirely spiritual contracts. There's evidence to support all 3. But most agree that the ritual trappings, the dances, the parade, the flowers, were never just pageantry. They were part of the belief that battle was necessary nourishment. The warriors line up now, forming 2 parallel rows. They chant softly, not for each other, but for the sun. Not insults, prayers. This isn't about hatred. It's about purpose. You watch as symbolic weapons are raised, obsidian-edged clubs, flower-wrapped spears. But they don't strike. Not yet. This is the rehearsal, the flourish before the storm. A boy near you whispers, "They must remind the gods what battle looks like." You nod, not sure what to say. Then suddenly, movement point two warriors break from formation and begin a slow-motion duel in the center of the plaza. Every step is choreographed. You recognize the pattern. It's the same spiral from the flower offerings earlier, except this time, the petals are fists. The ritual is combat. Each blow, each dodge, mimics the rising and falling of the sun. When one warrior faints, it symbolizes the sun slipping behind clouds. When the other counters, it's the dawn pushing through again. Their fight ends not with a knockout, but a bow. The crowd cheers softly, not a roar, but an approval. You realize the winner won't be celebrated for his strength, but for his capture, because, remember, prisoners are precious, not enemies, not waste. Gifts. A third group of warriors now joins the parade, those returning from actual flower war campaigns. They carry ropes of woven vines, each loop symbolizing a living captive brought back. You see a few young captives among them, unharmed, but unnerved, being led not to dungeons, but to baths. They'll be washed, federal dressed in ceremonial garb, because you don't sacrifice someone dirty. That would be rude. The lead priest raises a ceremonial staff adorned with blooming flowers and jaguar teeth. He slams it down once on the stone. The sound echoes across the plaza, final, weighty. The parade ends. The warriors disperse. The plaza empties. But the purpose lingers in the air like smoke from burnt petals. The children, the dancers, the flower bearers, you have all been part of this. And as you're led quietly from the platform, you catch sight of a single white blossom lying alone in the dust. Unclaimed, untouched, you don't pick it up, that it's not yours to carry. You descend a winding stone stairway, your feet brushing against centuries of dust. Here, in the dim glow of morning light breaking past the temple's upper tiers, you find the living heart of the sun god's offerings, not in bloodshed, but in brilliant color. The flower priestesses, draped in long robes stitched with marigold threads, move like slow ripples in a pond, circling a basin filled with clear, cold spring water. These women, keepers of Xochipilli's grace and the floral symbols of Huitzilopochtli's radiant path, tend to the sacred garlands and petal patterns that will crown the day's rituals. In this world, petals are power. You wouldn't think so, holding a daisy in your hand or picking a wilting rose from your garden. But to the Aztecs, flowers held fierce spiritual potency. They weren't just decorative. They were considered embodiments of divine speech. Flower and song was their term for elevated truth, art, poetry, and even sacred warfare. So yes, when the priests gathered baskets of fragrant blossoms, they were gathering weapons of a different sort. You're standing now at the edge of a floral mosaic, not unlike a giant mandala painted across the temple courtyard. Every pattern, every color, curve, and petal is planned with meticulous reverence. Red dahlias for sacrifice, white lilies for purification, golden sympacicle for life and sunlight. The priestesses don't speak, their movements speak for them. A gentle lifting of a palm, a twirl of a stem, a nod to the east where the sun is just cracking over the volcanic ridges. You can almost hear the flowers rustling, murmuring lullabies to the gods. One young girl, no older than 10, tiptoes forward, cupping a single hummingbird feather dyed deep magenta. She lays it at the center of the pattern, right in the spiral of calendula petals. It's not random. That feather once belonged to a bird fed entirely on flowers, and in Aztec cosmology, hummingbirds are spirit messengers. It's a loop. Flower feeds bird, bird serves God, God fuels sun, sun feeds flower. Try explaining that one at your next garden club meeting. The ritual choreography ramps up. Drummers begin their soft pulses in the distance, just enough to raise the hairs on your arm. Priestesses raise hands to the sky. They cast petals into the air, and a gust of wind catches them like confetti, scattering yellow and red fragments across the basalt stones. This isn't performance, it's communion. For a few surreal moments, you're witnessing the Aztec version of a standing ovation to the universe. Now you're guided to a long stone bench shaded by woven reed canopies. You're handed a small clay cup. Inside is a thick floral infusion, not alcoholic, but not quite tea either. It tastes like grass clippings mixed with rosewater and something bitter you can't place. That's probably the ground-up morning glory seeds. Fun fact, those seeds contain LSA, a natural compound similar to LSD. Aztec priests used small amounts to slip into trances. You'll be fine. Probably. Modern scholars still debate the extent of hallucinogen use in these flower rituals. Some say the priestesses relied heavily on floral psychotropics to commune with the divine, while others argue these were symbolic substances, used in such small doses that the effects were meditative rather than mind-bending. Either way, you're beginning to feel floaty. Not dizzy, just light. Like your breath got longer and slower. The flower priestesses chant softly now, their voices layered like the petals they toss into the wind. You catch snatches of Nahuatl phrases, in Xochitl, in Cuicatl, flower and song. Over and over. It's less of a phrase and more of a lull, a rhythm that folds your thoughts inward. Your eyelids feel heavy. You're not falling asleep, at least not yet. You're just sinking into the sensory softness of the ritual. Just as your mind begins to drift, there's a rustle near the courtyard's edge. A boy appears, arms full of flor de mayo branches. The blossoms are creamy white, and their scent is dizzying even from a distance. He's bringing them for the final act of this phase, the encircling. Priestesses weave these flor de mayo branches into a huge living ring around the main altar. Once completed, it marks the sun gate, a symbolic entrance through which Huitzilopochtli's light will pass to accept today's offerings. That's when you notice something odd. The ring is being built not only with flowers, but also with bones. Bird bones, polished and bleached, woven between the stems. You blink once, maybe twice. You're not hallucinating. That detail is real. Historians still argue whether this blend of flora and fauna was symbolic or functional. Was it meant to mimic the cyclical bond between life and death? Or was there some sonic quality to the bone structure that altered acoustics during chants? Either way, it's eerie, beautiful, balanced that a final whisper rises across the courtyard. The priestesses kneel, touching their foreheads to the floral path they've built. You follow their lead, forehead pressing gently to the warm stone, the faint smell of pollen thick in the air. There is no urgency, no climax, just a quiet, collective offering of gratitude and scent. The sun, now fully risen, gleams over the mountaintops. Its light flickering across petals like stained glass windows come to life. You might never look at your bouquet the same way again. You slide into a dense crowd just outside the sacred enclosure, following the scent of sweet burning copal. The plaza pulses with life. Merchants hawk roasted maize. Dancers with jaguar pelts twist in slow, spiraling motions, and drummers lay down hypnotic beats that seem to echo from the underworld itself. It's not just ceremony, it's a whole economy. You're in the Templo Mayor's outer courtyard, and while the rituals take center stage, you quickly realize that even gods need a supporting cast. That includes you, apparently, because as a wide-eyed observer, you're caught in the human web behind the divine stagecraft. Each performer you see, be it a flute player, a hunchbacked priest, or a boy dusted with golden powder, is part of a meticulous machine. The rituals aren't one-off events. They're massive, scheduled productions, complete with rehearsals, dress codes, and dietary restrictions. The priests don't just show up and wing it. They train for years, mastering both spiritual doctrine and ceremonial choreography. It's the Broadway of blood offerings, just without the jazz hands. You catch a glimpse of the priestly elite, easily identifiable by their jade jewelry, long black robes smeared with chalky ash, and occasionally, a cape made of hummingbird feathers. If you're feeling underdressed, it's because you are. These are the professionals, and their job is to keep the universe from unraveling by following rules so precise they make German engineers blush. Now over to the stagehands of this cosmic drama. Attendants who dye sacrificial victims' skin in the appropriate symbolic color, artisans who fashion clay effigies of the sun god Tenochtitlan, and older women who chant laments for memory while grinding maize for ceremonial bread. One particularly cheerful task? Preparing the zacatl, the sacred cacao drink served to both victims and elite guests. It's bitter, spiced, and frothed to perfection. Think of it as your last mochaccino if you're one of the chosen. You move closer to a high platform where two boys are painting a massive disc, yellow, with red rays stretching out like spiky suns. It's a representation of Tenochtitlan's blazing face. But this isn't some arts and crafts side project. It's a countdown timer. When it's complete, the sacrifice begins. The energy shifts subtly as the sun creeps across the sky. There's a group of young girls sweeping the stone paths in perfect unison. They're not just keeping things tidy. Cleanliness is sacred. The gods apparently dislike dusty altars. And here's a curious fringe belief. Some priests swear that Tenochtitlan once refused a sacrifice because someone wore sandals into the temple. Historians still argue whether this is religious dogma or just a case of extreme fashion policing. Still, it's not all solemnity and scrub brushes. Behind the temple wall, you catch the strains of laughter. Musicians improvise between rehearsals, weaving body tunes that satirize rival city-states. One even mimics a high priest's nasally chant, to everyone's amusement. So yes, there's space for irreverence, even here. Just not too loudly. The gods may appreciate a chuckle, but they don't tolerate mockery. Everything feels like it's building up to something. A momentum, a climax. You spot a man carrying a bundle of incense sticks, each one representing a city that pays tribute to the Aztec capital. They'll be burned in order, a reminder of the empire's reach. There's Texcoco, Tlacopan, and, yes, even rebellious Tlatelolco. A bit awkward, since they tried to defect last season. It's like reading a guest list with political subtext. An old woman offers you a handful of marigold petals to scatter at the edge of the sacred causeway. You do it, partly because it seems polite, partly because you're told it's good luck. She winks and says Tenochtitlan prefers the orange ones. Whether or not that's true, you don't argue with someone who's probably outlived 3 emperors. There's a strange balance here. Reverence and routine, fervor and fatigue. You realize the rituals aren't just about the sun god. They're about keeping things going, feeding the empire, anchoring people to something bigger than themselves, and maybe giving everyone a role to play. Even if it's just handing out petals that a breeze picks up, scattering ash from an incense pot. You watch it spiral into the sunlight, then disappear. Like everything else here, it's a performance with meaning. A smoky offering rising up to touch a god who, frankly, might not even be watching. You barely register the shifting energy until a trumpet, more of a conch shell, really, sends a deep, guttural moan across the plaza. It's time. The chatter dims. Dancers freeze mid-spin. You're standing at the edge of a ceremony that will decide whether the sun continues its daily journey. Or so the priests insist. 4 strong attendants, each representing a cardinal direction, emerge from the temple shadows. They're carrying something wrapped in red and white cloth. The crowd parts instinctively. You're close enough to see a young man's face peeking out from the bundle. He's painted blue from head to toe, with a narrow stripe of white running from his forehead to his chest. His expression? Calm, or maybe resigned. It's hard to tell. The sacrificio is chosen, not captured. In many cases, these people volunteer. They believe death by the obsidian blade guarantees eternal honor, a direct seat beside the gods. But volunteer or not, the fear must be real. A woman nearby whispers that the boy had been fed nothing but tamales and zacalado for 5 days. Another adds that he spent his final night in a palace suite, serenaded by flutes and given a flower garland. You wonder if that makes it better or worse. They ascend the steps of the Templo Mayor, spiraling ever higher toward the twin shrines at its summit. One for Huitzilopochtli, god of war and sun, the other for Tlaloc, god of rain and fertility. The ascent isn't just symbolic. It's meant to mimic the rise of the sun itself. The sacrificial victim will rise and then fall, becoming energy in the cosmic cycle. You move with the crowd to get a better view, angling your head as the blue-painted figure is laid gently across a stone slab. For attendants pin his limbs. Another priest, this one draped in eagle feathers, raises his blade. It glints darkly in the sunlight, volcanic glass, sharper than steel, capable of cutting with surgical precision. And then silence. No drums, no flutes, just wind. You feel it brush your cheek, dry and warm. For a moment, the world seems suspended. Then the blade plunges. It's swift, efficient. The priest lifts a still-beating heart toward the sky, offering it to Tonatiuh. The crowd doesn't cheer. They murmur prayers. Some bow, others scatter petals. You just stand there, rooted, caught between horror and awe. You're not watching a murder. You're watching a transaction, one that's been practiced for centuries. The heart is placed in a burning brazier, the body tumbled down the steep temple steps. It lands at the base with a dull, final thud. Attendants retrieve it, wrap it, and carry it away, likely for burial in a mass ossuary. Nothing is wasted. Bones may become tools. Skin may become ritual drumheads. In this world, death is just one more form of transformation that you'd think this would be the end, but no. The ceremony shifts gears. Now come the dancers again, this time slower, heavier. They reenact the myth of the 5 sons, where each era ends in catastrophe, and only sacrifice can reboot the cosmos. There's fire swallowing the earth. There's jaguars devouring the stars. There's a flood, then a storm, then another fire. It's both theatrical and deeply unsettling. The message is clear. Chaos waits just outside the circle of ritual. A child asks his father if the sun will rise tomorrow. The father nods but doesn't smile. You look up. The sun is past its apex now, beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon. Whether from suggestion or something deeper, it feels more vibrant, more secure, fed, perhaps, by the day's blood. You linger as the crowd begins to disperse, watching as the red-stained altar is washed with fragrant water. Priests chant cleansing prayers. The plaza smells like pine resin and iron. A hand touches your arm. It's the marigold woman again. She presses another handful of petals into your palm and tells you to scatter them before sunset. So he knows, she says. You ask who he is, she just points to the sky. That night, sleep does not come easily. The city, usually hushed after dark save for the occasional howl of a jungle dog or a drumbeat echoing from a distant temple, seems alive with murmurs. Not voices exactly, more like the low thrum of something ancient shifting beneath the stone foundations. You lie on a woven mat in a small guest shelter, listening. Even the air feels denser, heavier, the kind of night where the gods might whisper. You try to recall everything you've seen today: the dancers, the steps, the stone, the boy, the heart, but it all blends together like smoke and water. And then, finally, at the edge of exhaustion, sleep pulls you under. You dream of a garden. Not the neat, geometric kind you'd find in an Aztec noble's courtyard, but something wild and ancient. Giant flowers sway without wind. Leaves curl and uncurl in rhythm with your breath. In the center of it all stands a tree, twisted, massive, pulsing faintly with light. From its branches hang vegetables, or at least, things that resemble vegetables. Some are familiar, like maize, its golden husks glowing softly in the dream light. Others are strange. A deep purple root shaped like a curled fist. A knobby green pod, humming faintly. A fruit that smells like pepper and rain. One of them, hanging low enough to reach, looks like a cross between a yam and a starfish. As you touch it, the world shifts. A voice, not heard, but understood, whispers a single word: Xochitl. You wake with a start. The moonlight filters through the reed walls, painting shifting shadows across your face. There are no sounds except the distant chirp of crickets and a soft splash from a nearby canal. You sit up slowly, still feeling the echo of that word in your chest. Xochitl. It means something like flower essence. But not quite. In Nahuatl, words are dense, layered with meanings both literal and poetic. It could mean life force, or beauty, or the fleeting nature of blooming. You scribble it down, just in case. And then you notice something odd. Your hand smells faintly of marigolds. You don't remember touching any since the ceremony. You sniff again. There it is, warm, earthy, unmistakable. You look at your palm in the moonlight. Nothing visible, but the scent lingers, as though something intangible had passed between you and the woman in the plaza. Something more than flowers. You lie back down and stare at the ceiling, wide awake now, mind racing. The Aztecs weren't just sacrificing to keep the sun moving. They were planting something, preserving something, maybe even hiding something. And that something, you realize, might still be growing. Because empires die, but seeds wait. Tomorrow, you'll ask around. The gardeners, the herbalists, maybe even the old woman with the clouded eyes near the market who sells dried peppers and spells in paper bags. Someone knows what Xochitl is, or was, or might yet be again. Morning comes with a crispness you didn't expect. After the thick warmth of yesterday, the air now carries a slight bite. Not cold, just alert. As if the city, too, has woken with purpose. You rise early, skipping the usual breakfast of tortillas and honeyed cacao. There's a direction to your steps now, guided more by instinct than logic. You cross the canals on flat stones slick with dew, weaving through the outer market before the full weight of the day settles in. The city is just beginning to stir, merchants rolling out reed mats, children fetching water, priests in ochre robes already sweeping the temple steps. You go first to the woman with the clouded eyes. Her stall is a crooked table draped in cloth, cluttered with bundles of dried herbs and paper cones filled with powders, red, green, yellow, black. She watches you approach without moving, head slightly tilted, as if listening to footsteps inside your thoughts. You don't know how to ask. So you simply say the word, Xochitl. Her mouth tightens. Not a smile. Not quite fear either. Something else. She reaches beneath the table and pulls out a tiny clay bowl. Inside it, wrapped in bark and dry petals, lies something like a shriveled root. Purple-brown, gnarled, unassuming. She places it before you. This is not for eating, she says in a voice like warm gravel. It's for remembering. You ask what it is, what it was. She doesn't answer directly. Long ago, before the fourth sun, before the fifth even rose, the people who lived here grew things we no longer name. Their gardens fed not just the body, but memory. And memory, she says, tapping the side of her head, is a kind of seed too. You pick up the bark-wrapped bundle. It's light, almost hollow. She leans closer. Boil it with honey and lime. Drink it when the stars are quiet. Only once. You ask what will happen. Either nothing, she says, or everything. You leave with the bundle tucked inside your sash, and her voice echoing behind you. Some plants remember the world better than we do. Back at your quarters, the sun is high now, casting shadows in sharp angles across the floor. You prepare the tea as instructed, carefully shaving slivers from the root into a clay pot of boiling water, stirring in honey and a squeeze of lime. The scent is sharp and floral, like peppered rose water. You wait until nightfall. You wait until the stars feel quiet. And then you drink that tea first. It's just warmth. Then a stillness. Then the world begins to dissolve. Not violently, not suddenly. More like an old curtain slowly being drawn back, that you're standing in the same garden from your dream. But this time it's awake, vibrant, real. The twisted tree still stands at the center, but now its bark pulses like breath. Around it, figures move, tall, draped in robes made of living vines, their skin shimmering like polished stone. They tend the plants not with tools, but with gestures, with chants that sound like wind over water. You realize this is not memory. It's not hallucination. It's both. It's imprint. The way a seed holds the shape of a tree inside it. One of the robed figures notices you. They approach, wordless, and offer a bowl, filled with a thick green pulp flecked with gold. You drink again, and you remember a city before cities, a harvest before calendars. You remember a time when vegetables weren't just food, but vessels, carriers of stories, of lineages, of dreams. Each plant held a role, one to make you sleep, one to help you see, one to make you remember who you had been before you forgot. You gasp and awaken. You're on your mat. The clay pot sits empty beside you. Outside, the birds are chirping. The canals shimmer with early morning light. But something has changed. You feel it in your chest that you've brought something back, and like any good seed, it's just waiting for the right moment to grow. You wake with the aftertaste of moss and stars. The room is silent, but the silence hums. Not empty, alive. You sit up slowly, not out of grogginess, but reverence, like someone rising from sacred ground. The bundle is gone. No trace of bark or flower or root. The clay pot, too, has cracked clean down the center, as if it had served its final purpose. Outside, the city has begun another day. But to you, it feels like a new calendar has started. You step outside and the light feels different. Not brighter, but more revealing. The walls seem etched with older lines than stone should remember. Even the dust on the cobbles holds pattern, like the remnants of a forgotten glyph. You make your way to the archives. Not the royal ones, not yet, but to the older ones. The neglected wing beneath the temple's shadow. Here, the walls are damp and the scrolls smell of mildew and insects. But here is where the oldest truths linger. You spend hours there, days. You forget to eat, forget to bathe. Your fingers are stained with ink, and your eyes burn from squinting at faded scripts written in dead tongues. But something guides you, some thread you picked up from that dream. That seed, you begin to notice them. The vegetables, not always named, sometimes just drawn, etched beside prayers, scribbled in margins of law texts, painted in scenes of festivals that no one remembers the meanings of, rooted under funeral pyres, planted along star charts. You find mention of a Huitzilopochtli, a vine said to wrap around the dreams of sleeping priests, whispering truths about past lives. There's Zacamilpa, an extinct field practice where entire crops were grown solely to absorb secrets. Each year, a priest would eat one leaf, and the next morning, recount visions of battles or lovers or cities that had not existed for centuries. And then, finally, you find it, pressed inside a crumbling codex of medicinal recipes, held together with spider silk and sapped out a sketch, crude but unmistakable. Zakiatl, labeled beneath in faded glyphs. The dreamer's bloom. The text is sparse, barely legible, but you make out phrases, born from the garden that once reached the stars, fed only on memory, grown where sorrow and silence meet. Last harvested in the year the rivers turned backward. You trace the ink with your fingertip, as if touching it might stir the plant's ghost awake. Then, suddenly, a memory that isn't yours defiled dark red soil. Women planting seeds as they sing. One weeps, not from sadness, from knowing a temple, hollowed out to grow something no sun should touch. A child, fed the petals of Zakiatl on the day of his naming, who spoke only in dreams for the rest of his life. You pull your hand back. Whatever this plant it remembers. It carries not just history, but emotion, loss, hope, fear, the raw, unprocessed current of human time. And now it's inside you. You feel it, not as a burden, but as a rootedness, a grounding. Like your bones remember soil, you leave the archive as dusk falls. The city glows gold with evening light. Children chase each other near the canals. An old man plays a flute that sounds like birdsong. Everything is so normal, and yet you carry something none of them can see. Back at your home, you take out parchment. You begin to write, not facts, but impressions. Not what Zakiatl was, but what it meant. You write, some plants carry hunger, some carry healing, but a few, very few, carry memory. Not just of their own life, but of ours. They are the librarians of the land, the vessels of the forgotten. The garden of dreams still grows, if we remember where to look. You stop. The candle flickers. Your ink runs out. You don't refill it. You just sit there, in the stillness, and feel something blooming quietly inside you. It doesn't need sun. It only needs time. The vegetable that could predict death. Some things are only whispered in gardens. You find yourself drawn to a name you encountered once, half erased on a water-stained scrap of parchment. Petal, the mountain root of shadows. It's mentioned just once more in an old monk's journal, in a section so smudged and frantic that it reads more like a confession than a botanical account. No illustrations, no habitat details. Only this sentence. It blooms 7 nights before death, and only in the presence of the one fated. That's it. Most would dismiss it, folk myth, or poetic metaphor. But you feel a pull, an irrational certainty that Tlöqultepetl was more than a story. That somewhere, perhaps in the more isolated highlands, it still waits to bloom. You journey west, toward the cliffs where clouds bleed into the soil. The local guides refuse to accompany you past the third ridge. They don't offer warnings, just silence and shaken heads, as if speaking would awaken something best left dormant. Alone now, you ascend through thinning air and dense mist. On the 7th day, you find a grove with no birdsong. The air is still but charged, as if thunder had passed through hours before. Trees lean away from a circle of dark soil, too symmetrical to be natural. In the center, a plant no taller than your shin. It doesn't look like much, slender stem, deep violet leaves. At its base, a bulbous root that pulses faintly, not unlike a heartbeat that it's not labeled. But you sit beside it and wait. The first night, it does nothing. The second, its leaves shift, slightly, unnaturally. Though there is no breeze. On the third night, you dream of faces. Not ones you know, but they know you. They speak in languages your mouth cannot repeat, but your soul understands. Why the 5th night, the flower begins to unfurl. black petals edged with silver veins. It doesn't emit a scent, but the air around it thickens with memory, yours and not yours. Tears fall down your cheeks without understanding why. You feel grief, not for yourself, but for strangers long buried, for names never recorded, for love never spoken aloud. And on the seventh night, it blooms fully. Only then do you realize it has bloomed for you. The prophecy wasn't metaphor. The root didn't simply predict death. It honored it, celebrated it, not as an ending, but as a return, a convergence, a seed falling back into earth. You don't feel fear, only stillness, a kind of peace you didn't know was missing. You leave the mountain unchanged in body, but not in essence. You never see the root again, but in the weeks that follow, you begin to write more clearly. Your thoughts gain depth. Your stories soften at the edges. You describe grief not as absence, but as echo, as a quiet reminder that someone once mattered deeply. And when your time finally comes, years later, perhaps in sleep, perhaps not, it won't be a surprise that you'll know, because once, in a misty garden, you saw the flower that blooms 7 nights before goodbye, and it bloomed for you. The garden that grew backward. Sleep comes quickly the night you arrive at the monastery. Perched along the cliffs of what used to be the Khmer Empire's western edge, this forgotten temple overlooks nothing. No villages, no rivers, no ruins. Just sky. It feels like it was built to face time itself. You came here for silence, for rest, maybe for answers. The monks are kind, if quiet. They offer food and space. No questions, no introductions, just presence. That, in itself, feels ancient. That on your second day, you notice the garden that it's nestled behind the crumbling east wing. Unfenced, unmarked, and, curiously, without a single young sprout. Every plant appears fully grown, tall sunbursts of amaranth, deep, low-lying taro leaves, old stalks of something like lemongrass, except dusted with what looks like frost, despite the heat. You ask a monk in passing, "Is the garden not for growing?" He pauses, then replies simply, "It does grow." But when you return the next day, one of the plants is gone. Not harvested. Gone. In disturbed soil. No cut marks. Just nothing where something had been. The next morning, 2 are missing. You begin documenting, sketching shapes, counting stalks, noting shadows. Each day, the garden shrinks. Plants vanish not at random, but in a slow, orderly retreat. From fullness to emptiness, the garden is ungrowing, and the soil, once cracked and dry, becomes darker, wetter, more fertile with every disappearance. By the 7th day, only one plant remains, the tall, reed-like specimen, too symmetrical to be wild. It sways in still air, its stalk beginning to shorten at dusk. Right before your eyes, not growing upward, shrinking. As if its time is being unspooled in reverse. By nightfall, it's gone. The garden is now an empty square of perfect soil. Smooth, silent, you stare at it in the moonlight, waiting, and then, before your eyes, a seed rises. From beneath the earth, as if being unburied, you do not move. You do not speak. You only breathe, shallow and slow. The seed hovers a moment, suspended in the air, then settles back onto the surface. It pulses once, twice, and then nothing. The next morning, when you ask the monk again, he shrugs. Some things grow forward. Others return. He pats the ground gently and walks on. You return to the garden daily for the remainder of your stay. Not to interfere, only to witness. And one evening, a full garden is once again in bloom. You don't record it this time. Some histories, you learn, are meant to fade. Not because they're unimportant, but because their purpose was always to remind you that time isn't always a straight path. Sometimes, things must disappear. so they can be remembered the way they were always meant to be. The sculptor who carved the monsoon in the far reaches of the forested hills, deep within the crumbling bones of the old empire, lies a half-toppled shrine known only by those who never speak of it. It's not marked on maps. No road leads there. The jungle reclaims everything, except this. When you find it, quite by accident, it doesn't feel like discovery, it feels like permission. The shrine itself is unremarkable. 3 stone steps, a platform overgrown with moss, and a wall of bas-reliefs. But the carvings, they stop you in your tracks. Each one is different. Not scenes of war or gods or kings. No inscriptions or offerings. Just rain, not symbolic, not decorative, actual rain, drops, streams, torrents, water in motion, frozen in stone, carved with such impossible precision that it takes several minutes before your eyes believe what they're seeing. That a downpour immortalized. There's a man in every panel, old, hunched, shirtless. Always the same. He holds no tools, just open hands, extended skyward. And in every frame, he's smiling. A monk tells you later that the sculptor had no name. No one remembers when he lived. Only that he came during the dry years, decades, perhaps, without a proper monsoon. Crops failed. Lakes shrank. Spirits were restless. The people prayed, but nothing came. Then one day, the man arrived, carrying nothing, speaking little, carving stone. He carved every day, without pause. Rain that had never fallen, clouds that had never gathered, lightning that had never struck. For 7 years, he chipped water from stone, and on the final day, it rained, so the story goes. But what you find most extraordinary, what keeps you returning to the shrine, isn't the rain. It's what appears beneath it in the final panel. Nearly hidden is the faintest carving of something not made of water. It's a face. Your face, not precisely, but close. Enough that it unsettles you. The eyes, the mouth, the same asymmetry, the same weariness, the same sense of arrival. You run your fingers over the carving, tracing the groove of a cheek you've never touched, yet recognize. And for a moment, just a breath, you feel it. Not rain, but something in the air. A pressure shift, a scent of petrichor, a coldness on your scalp, a rising wind. You look up. The sky is clear, but you know, somewhere, a storm has begun. And in that moment, you realize he wasn't carving the past. He wasn't even carving hope. He was carving certainty that he knew the rain would come, not because he summoned it, but because he made space for it in the world, carved its shape, declared its presence, and now the shape is complete. Whether it rains or not, no longer matters. The monsoon exists because someone believed it would, and maybe that's what history is. In the end, not facts, not proof, but belief, carved deeply enough that even the sky can't ignore it. The forgotten festival of sleepless kings in a small northern province of the Khmer Empire, so remote that maps of the time rendered it with only a single glyph meaning mist. There once took place a festival so strange, so utterly self-defeating in purpose, that its memory was nearly lost to time. It was called the Vigil of Sovereigns. Held once every 12 years, and only under a moonless sky, the vigil was not a celebration of harvest, gods, or war victories. It was, oddly, a night of deliberate insomnia, observed solely by those of noble blood, and no music was played. No feasts were served, no dances performed. Instead, the entire royal court, kings, regents, scribes, generals, concubines, would gather in a silent courtyard lit only by oil lamps and sit in complete stillness for a full cycle of the night. Eyes opened no speaking, no movement, no sleep. And why? The original decree is still etched faintly on a black sandstone stele, now kept in the undervaults of a university archive in Phnom Penh. The translation reads, "He who sleeps through the darkness does not know its shape. Let the kings stay awake and learn what it is they rule." What shape they meant remains unclear, but the vigil was strictly enforced. Attendants watched from the shadows. Anyone who nodded off, even briefly, would be removed, shaved bald, and made to wear a small bell on their ankle for a year. Those who endured the night in full were permitted to inscribe a single word of reflection into a ceremonial clay jar. Some wrote, "Fog," "emptiness," "mirror," or "echo." One noble simply etched, "Mother." The jars were never opened again after that. But what makes this ritual so profoundly strange isn't just the event itself. It's what happened next, following every vigil, as if by cosmic whim or the will of exhausted minds. Every decision made by the kingdom's leadership for the next full month was made during sleep. Yes, actual sleep. Decisions were not drafted, debated, or recorded. Instead, the noblemen and scribes would sleep in chambers lined with crushed lotus petals, incense thick in the air, and upon waking, each would describe what they had dreamt the empire should do. Sometimes the dreams contradicted. Sometimes they aligned. But no matter what, the court would act only on dream consensus that a tax law dreamt by 3 out of 9 nobles might be passed, that a new canal, seen in sleep by a concubine and a blind poet, could be approved. There are written accounts of legal disputes resolved by asking the guilty party to sleep on it, and the verdict depended on what they dreamt they deserved. Our modern sensibilities. This seems absurd, governance by dreams, national policy by REM, but for a kingdom ruled by the waking mind year-round, perhaps one sleepless night was enough to remind them. Not all knowledge rises in the light. There is wisdom in stillness, in fatigue, in drifting thought, and perhaps most of all, in dreams. And what happened to the festival? It faded quietly with the empire. The last known vigil took place in the year 1313, after which the jars were buried, and the courtyard itself was dismantled, brick by brick, to construct a monastery. Some say a few jars remain, buried in the eastern hills. Others say that anyone who stumbles across one will not be able to sleep until they've added their own word inside. But who knows? Perhaps one day, you'll find one. And after a long, silent night beneath a blank sky, you'll know what word to carve. Not because someone told you, but because your dream will whisper it first.